Hey guys, and welcome to the Curious Coconut. This is our very first episode with our very first host. I'm here joined by my friend Adi, and we're also joined by Daryl. Daryl, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sounds good. Yeah, good to meet everybody as well. I'm Daryl. I've been in the technology space for the last 15 to 16 years. Initially, I really started out in Web 2.0 companies, very traditional tech companies. And right now, I'm really passionate about Web 3.0, crypto, blockchain. I always joke, right, that it is the new ABCs of technology, right? So you've got
Hmm.
AI, artificial intelligence, you've got blockchain, and you've got cryptocurrency. So these are the three areas that I'm pretty much focused on these days.
Cool. And what motivated you to join this kind of crypto or blockchain or AI industry? Um,
Hmm. So I think technologies have always come and go. And I think, whenever the rules of the game change, right? Like
yeah.
and whenever fundamental rules, fundamental ways industries behave, the ways that we leverage technology to change how we conduct our business or even go about our social lives, whenever these
Hmm.
things change, I think new winners and new losers are being created, right? And
Yeah.
again, it's back to the theory, right? So I love to tell this story about football or even basketball, right? Like what if basketball was to be played with your feet instead, right? And what if football, the rules would have changed, right, to allow even you to touch the ball with your hand or hold the ball with your hands and run, right? Then would the Cristiano Ronaldo, would the David Beckham, would the Lionel Messi's of the world continue to be the world's best players in football? Probably not, right? Because again, it goes back to that theory, right? Whenever the rules of the game change, um, you know, I think new winners and new losers will be created. And for me, the ABCs of technology really would, change the way we interact and we really, conduct a lot of our business activities in the society in the future.
That's a really cool analogy, by the way. I don't think I've ever heard that before. But yeah, really interesting way to look at things.
Yeah, and what do you hope to achieve with the work that you do? Do you have any goals that you set or
Mm.
um,
So I enjoy technology because of the ability of technology to be enjoyed by many people at a certain point of time. Because the main benefit of going digital would be that any product, any service can immediately be available to almost everyone, right, everywhere. And I think it gives me a lot of joy when some of my past products or products that I've been very honored to have worked with and worked on. Some of those products are still being used by millions of people today. And it's actually quite fascinating and it's quite fun to see those products really changing the way we behave, right? Or even the way we travel, the way we pay, the way we shop for goods online, right? And I think those things give me a lot of passion. Number
Hmm.
two, I like the impact of technology on the world, right? So I see technology as being a very big leveler, right? Gone are those days where you need to come up with, maybe 100, 200,000, right? Hundreds of thousands worth of startup capital if you want to set up a shop in a swanky shopping mall, right? In a brick,
Hmm.
like, setting up a brick and mortar store. Today, perhaps, you don't need maybe half the price, a quarter of the price, depending on where you are. You have an internet connection, you have a laptop, you have a smartphone, you can take photographs, you can sell anything that you can create online on e-commerce, right? And I think that is just but one of the many opportunities that technology can act as a leveler, right?
Yeah.
And of course, social media as well, right? Like if you can sing really well, gone are those days where you really need to audition, right? You need to like knock on the doors of agencies. You need to go to physical places to really get your music
Hmm.
being heard by people who would then pick the best singers, right? So I think technology has become a very big leveler
Yeah.
and should continue, and we should continue to responsibly steward technology to fulfill that role of creating a fair and level playing field for everybody.
Yeah. Like technology is definitely a leveler in my opinion as well. And I feel like with the recent advancements in AI and stuff, I feel like more and more people can do more things that they couldn't previously. So I definitely find that very interesting of how like technology can, bring change upon so quickly. Um, but Tong has told me a lot about like your past experiences as a startup. So do you want to talk a little bit about like some startups you founded and how your experiences was going through the startup phase in your life?
Mm. So I played a lot of games growing up.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of like sports, right?
Yeah.
And when I injured my knee, actually, I realized that you couldn't do a lot of the sports, right? And online games. So I started a lot with sports games. So
Yeah.
like NBA Live, right? Like basketball games or FIFA football games, right? Pro Evolution Soccer by Konami, right? So a lot of all these games are those was kind of like my breach moving from traditional sports, like physical sports, right, into
Mm.
esports. And I felt that, esports actually kept a lot of the tactical knowledge of playing sports, right? In fact, all the more, because you get to control every player on the team, you then can really play, football or play basketball or any sports, right? Just like how you would if you were a coach. And then,
Yeah.
of course, that kind of evolved into me playing other games as well, MMORPG, right? And it's also one of those things where I used to joke with some of my friends as well. If you start eating a lot of food, right, you might get, some people might get tempted, and they might have the illusion that because you eat a lot of that certain type of cuisine, you would end up being a really good chef.
Yeah, yeah,
Is
that's
is
definitely
that
not
the
true.
is that the case
Yeah.
though? Is that the case?
Exactly, right? So a little bit foolhardy. So a bunch of us actually decided to build our own games, right?
Mm.
So we really set out, to build a company, trying to create our own games, right? Games that would have a very unique Asia focus, right? That could
Yeah.
potentially become global.
Hmm.
And we were so wrong, right? We were so damn wrong. Because after we started and we looked at our game, it really felt like a school project, right? It was pretty
Mm.
much at the level that was even lower than a lot of the school projects out there these days, right?
Yeah.
So, and then we also quickly realized that a lot of the gaming companies, they are massive billion-dollar companies, right? And the amount of money, the amount of budget that they have in, investing into not just the creation of the game, right? Because you need to come up with that game concept. But at the
Hmm.
same time, you also need to have really good design. You really need to have really good graphics, right? You know, generated visuals, right?
Yeah.
And we were far from it. So we pivoted not by choice, but by necessity, because
Mm.
we kind of bit the bullet, right, and said, you know what, instead of completing the university degree, we were moving into doing this full time, right, in lieu of our university education. So it was also one of those things where after you have sunk in a significant amount of cost, right, and in this case, not just financially, but also with your time and effort as well, you then move over to, you reach a situation whereby you have to go all in, you have to go big, or you go home, right?
Hmm.
So quickly pivoted into distributing games instead. So we
Mm.
were really distributing games from Japan, right, from Korea, and that was also the time where Japanese and Korean games were coming up quite a lot, right? And
Yeah.
and this was like more than a decade ago, and a lot of those games were not localized in languages yet. So we
Hmm.
actually did multi-language packs for them, right? So we translated the games, and then, we went one up, right? So we even had localization, not just of the language, but also of the in-game events. So if there was
Wow.
an event, for example, or if there was a Diwali, if it's in if it's that week of Diwali, then
Yeah.
we would actually create in-game, right, festive gift
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
packs. It was
Interesting.
really
Yeah.
cool. And I remember that because we had this virtual festival of lights, right?
Yeah.
And the Festival of Lights were amazing, right? So we
Yeah.
outsourced a lot of the graphics. And I
Hmm.
remember because it's quite amazing when you see, and I'm a very big fan of, the kind of art, right? That a lot of people would
Yeah.
create, Diwali art, right? That people would create in
Yeah.
front of houses. We had people doing that online.
Hmm.
And this was 10 years ago,
Wow.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's so cool because like I always play games where there would be like a Western element of like if there's Christmas, there'd be like Christmas trees and stuff in games. But I never really thought from like an Indian perspective, because I'm Indian from background, that there'd be something like, you could celebrate Diwali in the game as well, which is really cool and interesting.
Amazing, amazing. And I felt that was quite inspiring as well, because that was also the very first time that you could see the power of not just creating a game, but
Yeah.
also anywhere within technology, right? That ability to have a community. If you can create a really good platform, then the platform would really form that nexus at which the community can build their creativity and innovation upon.
Mhm.
Right. And I saw that as a really, really interesting way of how technology could interact with many, many people, and even serve an intention that goes beyond what it was originally created for. Right.
Yeah.
So, and I learned so much about India without even having to be in India. So I
Yeah,
thought
for
that's
sure.
amazing.
That's really interesting, and I can imagine that not many people were doing it back in the day, right? Did you have
Yeah,
any
I
competitors at all
So
doing all of
we
this?
we kind of did, but it was also one of those things where if you were to just rewind back to the theory that I said earlier, right? And that was a theory that I really felt very, very passionate about. And I guess it's also quite original because like I kind of played a lot of sports, right? And whenever you have new changes in sports, for example, like cricket or football or even tennis, right? Like there are new rules, even in volleyball, right? There is video assisted refereeing, for example. Now there is a lot more technology that's being used in refereeing, for example, right? And Empire these days then start to behave very differently. They start looking out very differently on the players' interactions, the rules of the game. And you would also realize that, again, it goes back to that theory, right? Whenever new technologies come into play, then there is new potential for winners and losers. And I guess for us back then, because of new technologies like GPS, right, where you can then virtually identify where a person is physically in. And that creates a very unique kind of mishmash, right? Like virtual reality, augmented reality, but you also still have that little flavor of where that person actually is, right? And there were a lot of games that came out at that point of time, maybe you have 7, 8 years ago, right? Pokemon Go was one fascinating one.
Yeah.
A physical location of somebody actually affects the in-game kind of location, right? And then that's
Mhm.
crazy. You see crowds of people moving, from place to place, trying to catch Lapras, right? In the
That
or
was so
other
insane back then.
it was insane, right? Like
Yeah.
people who didn't like walk around a lot started exercising so much, burning so much calories, right? So to me, I think we had a lot of competitors, but because the market was so new, there was just a lot of blue ocean space that everybody could kind of grow their own respective pies in, right? And for us, it was also a very, very niche area. So I guess for startups, what was really important was that we started off really niche. So if you go back to the restaurant theory, right, like we were starting out as chefs, instead of boiling the whole ocean, right, we decided, we would just focus on localization. So we didn't even create our own games in the end. We were just localizing games for the game publishers who perhaps weren't that interested in markets that we were going to help them expand into, right? Because a lot of them, they would have their own tier A cities, for example, right? Where you look at data and you'll be like, I need to launch in China, in America, right? In some of the big European region, like countries as well, right? So there was a very regional approach to what they were doing. But I felt that what we offered them was that ability to, test out new markets with us first, right? And we also kind of worked out localization in terms of language, localization in terms of in-game play, and also localization in terms of like payment, different payment methods, right? Because we also had this concept where if you're a platform, you would then have to have, it's a bit like piping, creating an infrastructure of pipes, right? Today, if you can pump out water, you can pump out orange juice, you can pump out, chai latte, right? You could pump out lassi, whatever, right? Because once you have pipes, you can literally pump out anything. And then those pipes also doubled up as a way to collect payment. So if you look at how the technology or how, that distribution of content and that monetization happened, it was really growing the content and distributing outwards and then bringing monetization, earning the revenue back in, right? And I thought that also got us started and really, to grow the company, which was really quite fun actually.
Yeah. Like, yeah, you're basically creating like the infrastructure for like the gaming industry. But what would you say is like a major challenge that you faced or like a setback during that like time of the startup, and like how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so I think it was a very enriching, but also a very uncertain period of just venturing into the dark, right?
Yeah.
Because looking back, a lot of the entrepreneurs, right, when be year in or even decades in, right, looking back, hindsight is always perfect. Right. When you're looking back, you'll be like, yeah, we worked really hard, right? We worked our guts out, and in 5 years, we kind of earned our first $1 million in revenue.
Yeah.
But if you are going through that, when you are in the tunnel, it's actually really, really scary because you have no idea where the light is at the end of the tunnel. Of course, when you're out of the tunnel and you're looking back, you'll be like, I spent 5 years doing this, right? And there was light at the end of the tunnel. But when you're in the tunnel, can you imagine you have no idea whether you could make payroll next month? You had no idea whether a competitor somewhere out there in the world, and this is not like another startup only, right? It could be a multinational corporation who one day wakes up and be like, you know what? I think these young punks are doing something interesting, right? Let me triple my budget and just flood them and try to do things better than them, right? With 10 times the budget, right? So it was always back to the key ingredients of what made us unique. So there was a lot of introspection as well. It was very, very uncertain. And at the same time, you try then to leverage the uncertainty into actionable things that you could really, work on as a team to improve your product, to improve your entire support community, right, as a company, and also improve the kind of partnerships that you have, because all of those would act as the moat that you would have, right? And that moat is really important because it is like your buffer. It's probably like 6 months worth of moat, right? So whenever I look at the concept of moat, I look at, how long would it be before someone can replicate whatever we have within our moat, right? And the shorter the frame, the more replicable we are, and that is not good.
So what you're saying is that like with the startup, it's not only important to have a unique product, but also to like continuously be moving fast, or else someone else will just swallow you.
Exactly. Because if a lot of times people try to, and I guess, sometimes part of us would always view the startup journey as a journey with a destination or a certain objective or a certain target in mind, right? But then more often than not, you would realize that it is the journey and not the destination. Because as much as you want to have a fixed destination, I mean, you could always hit, a certain profit level and then you quit, right? But then if you want to keep the startup as an ongoing kind of running company that is sustainable, that is there for the long term, then there are also a lot of factors, there are a lot of circumstances which, unfortunately, as a company, you have zero control over. For example, what competitors are doing, right? For example, what technologies would be out there being created next year, for example, right? Like the creation of GPS, the creation of new, internet technologies actually formed the basis for iPhones to be created, right? Like if we were stuck on 2G internet, then iPhones probably would have way ahead of its time, right? The same thing for virtual reality glasses, right? Like the technology has always been ready, but are people ready for it? Is the underlying infrastructure ready for such a massive consumption of data, right? I think a lot of all these things also, move around, right? These are all moving parts. So again, can you, right, really stay, complacent once you reach a certain target? It's really difficult.
And in this point in time, you're no longer working on this project anymore, right? That's a project in the past. Is there a reason why the team has disbanded or why you have left the team?
So you're right. That is now a figment of my nostalgia, right?
Long time.
It was also one of those things where there were two reasons why we exited. The first one was a much larger investor with the right, supporting ecosystem and underlying infrastructure actually made an offer for us. And, again, it was actually a good decision to sell it and eventually graduate that from our nurturing, right? Because again, from 0 to 1, a certain set of skills are required to grow a company from 0 to 1. To grow a company from 1 to 10, perhaps you can stretch yourself to do it. To really take the company from 10 to, let's say, 1,000, or even to IPO, right, to the promised land, these are all skill sets that, number one, you would probably require a new, group of leaders, or you will need your current leaders to kind of adapt, change themselves, right, and pick up those skill sets. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is actually, as someone who is still very keen to remain in technology industry, are those new skill sets the ones which I want to pivot myself into? Or am I going to say that, currently with my desire to learn more things, or with that passion to want to create new products, right? That is something that I want to remain focused on. So I guess those are two aspects which, not just myself, right? Like all of us considered alongside our stakeholders, and we decided to exit. And again, it's also one of those things where, do you want to remain on a certain train, perpetually, right? Or are you going to say that, look, I've been doing this route, right? I've been doing the Singapore, India, China route for a really long time, right? And maybe I want a change of scenery, right? But at the same time, I still like the whole idea of being on the train and enjoying that process of, traveling from point to point, enjoying the scenery, right? So to me, it was, I still wanted to be on the train. Perhaps, being on the airplane is not something, or that is up my alley right now, right? The analogy, right? But at the same time, I want to explore new scenery. So I kind of remained on the 0 to 1, the 1 to 10 kind of path. And just that, the location, and in this case, the industry, right? It's no longer gaming, it's no longer 2.0, but more into the Web 3.0 space, which I actually think that we are going through a bit of a winter now. And it's always a good thing, right? Because it is so cheesy, right? Like, how do you make money? How do you make profits? You buy low and you sell high. And now we are in a climate in the industry where crypto is somewhat with going into winter, or it is already in winter right now. And I think it's growing out of winter soon, because it's been winter for quite some time, right? And maybe I'm wrong. Right. So the disclaimer here is that, those are my personal opinions, right? Like, do not go out there, like,
spend not financial advice.
Or Bitcoin, right? But if that really works out, then maybe, could buy all of us a coffee.
Maybe.
Right. Wow. But I felt that, maybe if crypto were to be that next wave of technologies, then now it's a good time to actually enter it.
Yeah. Well, this is like a perfect transition, but like, what are your thoughts on the current landscape of crypto and like the future like it might bring?
As per anything that is starting out, I think there are a lot of kinks that have to be ironed out, right? Within the whole ecosystem, right? And I think unfortunately there've been a few instances where companies have not done really too well on corporate governance, right? On building something that is sustainable, right? And that does not kind of crash overnight, right? But I think, because of those instances, not just companies, right, but the entire industry, right? The entire ecosystem, including regulators, including, even end consumers ourselves, right? We have become a lot more savvy. We have become a lot more cautious. We have become a lot more knowledgeable somewhat, right? In terms of how the crypto space works. And regulators have been doing a great job in really stepping up, right? In really consulting even the industry in that process of creating new regulations, right? And I think that really forms what we want to see, because we have seen this whole process play out in, let's say, the technology space, like cloud technologies, for example, right? At the start, where you could upload all your data on the cloud, it was also like this, right? There was a whole kind of a crazy excitement where people started putting up stuff on the cloud, basically, right, for others to download. But at the same time, there were a lot of data privacy concerns. There was a lot of GDPR, PDPA kind of a data standards that were quickly drafted out in a way to catch up with the growing innovation, right? And also to make sure that the growing innovation would always have a bit of a counterweight to kind of rein it back in, right? Or kind of rein the negative consequences of that back in, right? And today, when you look at the crypto space, we are going through that phase, right? As per everything that is new. So I think that is a natural progression. And I think once that natural progression is completed, you would then start to see a lot more adoption of this particular technology. And somewhat interesting, there are also points, right? The first point is that there are a lot of upcoming happenings within the whole industry that I'm very bullish about, right? And I'll just name two, right? Number one, the growing influence and the upcoming kind of legitimization of how you could leverage crypto to do ETFs, for example, right? I think that is a massive part, right? So the whole topic around, can we break down real world assets into smaller parts so that, you know, the community as a whole can also participate in investing their money and gaining a stable kind of return from it, right? Because if I want to buy a property overseas, for example, that property might be out of my budget. But if I buddy up with 10 other people, have that agreement up in the open ledger so that it is transparent, it is, you know, irrefutable, basically, right? That it is legit, right? Then that offers me another opportunity to invest outside of my country, right? That's the first point. And the second point is, you know, somewhat, unfortunately, we are in we are in very uncertain times where, you know, the society today, right, is getting a lot more fragmented because of many happenings that are going around, right, that are happening globally, right? And sometimes if you end up in a region where the local currency might not be as stable, then it then becomes a necessity actually to find an alternative currency that is somewhat more stable, right? So there are a lot of places, right? And there are a lot of countries today where their currencies are either going through heavy depreciation or basically volatility, right? And volatility is crazy, right? And there are some regions, even, I'm not even saying countries, right? There are some regions where today, if you were to go to the supermarket, the prices in the local currency would change and have to be updated by the seller 3 times in a day, at least.
Yikes.
Why?
It's crazy.
Because the currency is so volatile. Can you imagine if you are earning as a local in that local currency? In the morning, I'm working hard, I'm making a living. I have no time to check my phone, my computer, or anything that tells me about the daily price of the Forex, basically, right? Of my local currency to any currency out there. So dangerous, right? Because I could be working so hard. One moment, I could be planning to buy something because I check my bank account and that is sufficient. And overnight, my budget could be gone.
Nothing.
Right? It's crazy, right? So again, if you combine the 2 points, right? Number one, there is a growing appetite for options where you could buddy up as a whole, right? There is that power of the community that would open up new potential investment opportunities, right? And to me, investment is a very, very good way. In fact, not just investment, right? Income and investment, right? There are more income opportunities being created as we become more digital, right? As the world gets more digitalized, right? And there are more investment opportunities where today you can be working hard on your income and you want to make sure you are hedging, right? You're not, and the goal is maybe not even to make money off my investments, but to just protect my income. Right. These are all fundamental things that I think, you know, everybody deserves a right in. Everybody deserves an opportunity to kind of make sure that when you're working hard, your money stays smart or your money doesn't depreciate, right? As you work hard, it makes up, right? So to me, that is where that passion is. And that is also where I see the cryptocurrency space expanding into it, actually.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you with all these things that have been happening with crypto, right? You get the fall of FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried. You get all these meme coins, all these shit coins, like Doge, and people just losing trust once they see like how big the bear market is. But do you think crypto should be more centralized, or should it remain decentralized as it is? Because there's this whole controversy. Government officials, they want everything to be centralized because they want to see where the money is going and everything. What are your thoughts on that, if you have any?
I guess in the current method where regulators are engaging with the bigger players in the cryptocurrency in the crypto space, right? The cryptocurrency space. You see that sandbox environment, right? Or you see that freedom for the cryptocurrency stakeholders, basically, right? It could be an exchange, it could be an OTC trader, it could be people building NFTs or even reselling NFTs, right? To me, I think innovation is really important in the ecosystem, because for technology, you really want to make sure that you do not set regulations, or you do not overly police, right, or overly kind of restrict the entire market such that it becomes a cookie cutter, right? When the industry becomes cookie cutter, then you lose a lot of that innovation and the possibilities that people from everywhere and anywhere, right, could come up with a solution that is built upon new technologies. But at the same time, I think the regulations are fair and just. And like what you've mentioned earlier, right? There have been a lot of cases. I wouldn't say a lot, but there have been cases where and those cases are not that different from what you would have seen in the traditional finance industry. So to a certain extent, I feel like maybe for a new kid on the block, like cryptocurrency, it is fair to see that there are definitely some players who have messed up the reputation of the industry, right? And again, I would just like to compare that, right, side by side to, let's say, the traditional finance industry, where, or any industries out there, right, there are still occasional kind of happenings on a few bad apples would spoil the whole bunch, right? So again, if we were to come back to this, then should we say that, should we ban the entire finance industry? Should we not let people touch the finance industry at all? Then I think that would be quite a myopic decision, right? So again, let the creatives do what the creatives are supposed to do. Let the regulators do what they're supposed to do. And I guess that's how you can achieve the best of both worlds, right? Because then you have people who are focused on objectives, right? So let it be a very objective focused, a very, very outcome driven kind of approach. And I think where we are right now, it's somewhat still in that very open, very collaborative mood, right? And I think that's
I think you raise very good points. Like, I feel like a certain level of freedom is important for innovation to occur, but you also don't want too much freedom where like people are taking advantage of like innocence. But in terms of regulation, would you say like it's helping break down the barriers for cryptocurrency? Because I feel like crypto is still like very much like at the edge of the main general like public perception. Like people don't still trust crypto very much. Would you say the regulation is helping break down that barrier a little bit?
I think yes. Having regulations act have two benefits, right? And it has two benefits, right? And I think having regulation, number one, offers a safety net. And it gives people the assurance that the industry is being regulated. That gives people the assurance that someone is looking out for you. Someone is helping to cover your blind spots with regulation, right? At the same time, regulation also forms that first few building blocks of standardization.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to my favorite example. It's like sports. In some countries, people play cricket in a certain way, and in other countries, people play cricket with a whole new different set of rules. And by the way that actually happens. In basketball, there is a three versus three variant. There is a 5 versus 5 variant. In football, there is not just 11 versus 11. There have been futsal, for example, where you don't play on the field, but you play on a hard court. Or you could play 7 versus 7. You could play 3 versus 3, very street style. But you see, the role of regulation forms that very, very first step where you could have people understanding that sport. And in this case, understanding the industry, number one, right? And that builds credibility because it shows people that if you were to play this sport, there is a global market for it. There are global competitors, and you could even one day, right, be traveling halfway across the globe and be joining in on a match of water polo, for example, right? Because the rules of water polo are somewhat the same, right? Number two, I think that is really interesting where you have people coming together to build a certain set of standards. Today, the ability of using fiat currency is unprecedented. And why that is unprecedented is because there are financial standards, there are financial rules and regulation. And of course, there are many, many people, right? Many, many stakeholders, many, many companies that actually form that basis where today I could tap my credit card anywhere in the world and be spending my local currency and getting something in a foreign country, right? Without the need to exchange, to exchange my local currency to that currency, right? So it goes back to the point where today, the FIFA World Cup, today the Super Bowl, today Cricket World Cup, for example, all these things wouldn't happen if there were no uniform standards, right? Because that is how humans behave, right? So standardization, regulations actually are essential. My call out, or I would say my caveat would then be over standardization would kill the game, right? The game of sports, the game of industries, even, right? And the game of the cryptocurrency ecosystem. And why? Because if I were to stipulate, if I were to draw out the lanes, if I were to standardize how people were to throw, right down to making them all cookie cutters, then I don't think sports would be that nice of a spectacle to watch, right? And then if you have to dribble the ball in a certain way, if you can only shoot from designated spots on the football pitch, then I think we could well be, just sitting down and watching a factory manufacture something, right? Like 100 pieces of the thing over 1 hour, right? And it's probably going to be that same enjoyment.
Yeah, I love your sports analogies, by the way. They're absolutely fantastic.
Unfortunately, our podcast should be ending soon. And a lot of the people that we want to listen to, to our podcast should be like younger people. I would like to ask you a question regarding young people wanting to start their own businesses. Is there any piece of advice you would give them?
So I guess number one, have the passion for it. To me, that is number one, because contrary to whatever you see on social media, right, or a lot of the successful entrepreneurs, right? Again, it goes back to on hindsight, everything looks easy, right? And again, there are a lot of people who have started their own businesses who perhaps have pivoted and have gone on to many other variants or other career pathways which they have been very, very successful on, right? So again, have that passion, because that passion drives you through the days where you are in the tunnel and you have no idea when you would see the light. And that passion is really important, right? So having that fire or having that source of fire would give you that burst, the additional push, right, when the days get dark. Number two, it's not just about passion, right? Have a plan, right? So that plan is very important. That plan has to be logical, right? Because all emotions and no logic would get you nowhere. So have some numbers, have some theory. You don't need to have a plan that plans out everything all the way, right? Like the first version of Facebook started out as a hot or not, right? So there are many, many companies who end up, right, not doing something that they originally started out to in the first place, right? And they have been wildly successful afterwards, right? And number two, having that plan also doesn't mean having a nice, static, forever constant plan, right? So having a plan that continues to pivot along the way, right? And the third one, it's really people. So if you realize I have kind of formed four P's, right? And the fourth one, it's really about people, because you really, really want to have the most suitable people working together with you. But at the same time, the people around you that you can convince to do the business with you also kind of affects what you would do, right? If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So look around, right? You know, whoever you are working with, or even a lot of introspection, right? Like look within yourself. What are some of the things? What are some of the skill sets that you have that you could potentially build a business around, right? So if I'm a really, really good, passionate, knowledgeable, very, very disciplined person that goes to the gym, right? The skill sets, the credibility, the outcomes, right, that I have created for myself, can that be replicable such that I could run a gym training startup, right? So again, you know, look back at number one, do you have that passion? Number two, do you have a plan? Are you willing to pivot it? Do you have the skill sets to kind of, you know, build out those pivots and making sure that those pivots are at the right, are doing the right thing at the right time, right? And then the next one is really about people. And you will realize that, you know, a lot of times, like the universe would kind of align the stars so that you could walk that path.
Yeah. Well, we just asked you for one and you gave us 4 pieces of advice, so love to hear that. One other thing I want to ask is like, we here at Curious Coconut, we love to like expand our knowledge. So do you have any like book recommendations that you think people should read? It could be anything like business related or like, you know, something nonfiction or fiction, whatever you like.
So I'm reading I actually have just picked up a book that I'm rereading. It's called Fountainhead. It's by Ayn Rand. It's actually a fictional book where it talks about that process of creation, and you know, when that creation kind of takes on a world of its own, what the creator's relationship with the creation would be. And
Okay.
and I thought it was actually quite interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
It's somewhat similar to it's not that similar, but it's somewhat in parallel to if you had watched the movie Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I
Um
watched it.
it would
Oh,
The chance
be
to.
along, yeah, it would be along those lines, right? Where, you know,
okay.
there was a certain original intention for that creation, and obviously the creation took on a different life, a different world, a different future of its own. And what then do you do with it, right? And I thought that was quite interesting because today you would see that a lot of technologies have been created. A lot of the technologies have started to take on a life of their own.
Yeah.
We as a society, we are grappling with both the pros and the cons of technology, right? Like, are we spending too much time on social media? Are
Yeah.
we spending too little time on social media, right? And I think it also goes back to a very kind of cliche, but I feel very strongly for it, right? It also goes back to the principle of today, is there really a right answer on how we should live our lives? No, right? For sure, right? So again, not everything is meant for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that is also the fun part where do not just focus so much on the destination, but the journey itself is also
Yeah.
quite fulfilling, right?
Love that. Love that.
Yeah, we'll have to get you on the podcast again to discuss the purpose of life some other time. Um, um, but yeah, I think we are going to end it here. It was so lovely meeting you, Daryl. And you had such amazing, you know, sports analogies, all your experiences with crypto and gaming. Really enjoyed hearing all your different opinions on different topics. So yeah, I would like to thank you on for joining us today. and for giving us some of your time. And yeah, I hope to stay connected.
Definitely. No, I appreciate this as well. Thanks for having me.